Horsepower. These 5.0 Mustangs have plenty, but the steering system, there's a lot of opportunities there. Today on Tech Garage, it's a steering makeover with some control arms on this Mustang, so the steering and handling will perform just as good as the engine does. Welcome to Tech Garage presented by Advance Auto Parts. Well, our Mustang goes really well, but steering, not so much. And we're going to address those issues today. We're going to take you through the entire steering system, Steering 101, from diagnosis to inspection, all the way to replacement of parts. We'll start out by putting this new rack and pinion underneath the Mustang. Now this alone will stiffen up the steering, but we're going to take it a lot further. We're going to put some new tie rod ends in. While we're under there, Proform sent us these control arm bushings. We're going to go ahead and put these control arms on. We'll really give us that nice ride. Then we'll go ahead and we'll let the car down and we'll deal with the upper end. Up under the engine, we're talking about a power steering pump. We're going to put a power steering pump on along with an inline filter. We'll talk about that a little later. Real important to make sure that the filter's in there to keep the system operating properly. Also, while we're under the hood, we'll go ahead and address the belt, the tensioner, and we'll top it off with some fresh fluid. But you know, before we do anything, we need to start out with a good visual inspection, and I think Brian's got us underway.
John, who doesn't love a Fox body Mustang? This is a highly capable chassis. We've seen it from weekend dragsters and track cars and autocrossers to show cars and daily drivers and everything in between. The one thing they all have in common is they've got to track safely, track truly down the road, and that is a great steering system, and that's what we're going to work on today. Now, first things you need to inspect when you're under here are, for example, the boots. They're both broken. This clamp broke away a long time ago. The end of the boot came off, and all the sand and dirt and everything this vehicle travels through has gone up inside to the inner tie rod joint. And in this case, there's sand coming out. That means it's like sandpaper. Every time you give input to the steering wheel, we're grinding that inner tie rod joint down. You wonder why this thing isn't tracking properly down the road? There's a starting point. Also, visually inspect the primary mounting bolts. Now, these bushings actually look pretty good. I don't think there's a lot of movement here from the primary bolts. Ultimately, these are going to need to come off. We've got to be sensitive about our high pressure power steering line and our return line. We're going to back them off up top so that ultimately we can pull this rack right down out. And we'll replace the new rack with the Moog tie rod ends that you saw John had. Those have Zerk fittings so we can keep this thing serviced and maintained over its life. So I'm going to get my buddy Mr. PB Blaster, hit some of these bolts and start the removal process.
Now your car may have different types of steering systems, so we're going to take a look at a few of them. We'll start out here with an older kind of beefy steering system. Heavier cars, trucks employ these. This is a gearbox steering system. It goes down here to some linkage called a parallelogram steering. And these are pretty simple. You just grab them, tug up and down. You look for some looseness. There's a lot of joints and flexibility in there. You can do a dry park test. You can put the car on the ground, turn it to the left or right, and look for any buckling on this system. Now our rack and pinions right here that we're going to put into the Mustang, this is a demo or cutaway of it. Brian was talking earlier about these seals. Now these outer seals right here, he mentioned the dust coming in here and the dirt. Well, it's going to eat these seals and you're going to get some leakage here. You also have a spool valve. The spool valve, this is the actual pinion that contacts the rack, and the spool valve directs fluid. And I can simplify it for you. Just think about it cut down the middle. If I shove fluid on this side and nothing on that, it's going to give driver assist in that direction, or I put a bunch of fluid here and not on that one, it's going to give it in the other direction. But that spool valve has to operate properly for that to happen. Then we went to actual electric power steering pumps. Well, what's an electric power steering pump? Exactly what it says. We took it off the belt. Power steering pumps have a lot of load on the vehicle. So by doing this, we're not driving it, it's driven electrically. It sends the hydraulic fluid down to the rack, and the rack works in the same way. Then the evolution went to electric power steering, and this is really cool. You actually have a steering angle sensor up in the column, and a steering angle sensor usually has two sensors built into it. One of them is a rotational sensor, and that tells the speed when you're turning it to the left or right. The other one's a torque sensor. Now that torque sensor tells how much effort you're doing it. And then what goes on, it tells the computer, and the computer tells the rack and pinion here, hey, turn to the left or right, how fast and how hard. Now that It's a little bit scary, I know what you're thinking, but think about it. You've probably been driving for years with a car drive-by-wire. I got a throttle right here. You push the throttle, and when you push the throttle, it goes to the computer, input goes over to the throttle body, and then it goes ahead and turns your throttle on. No direct linkage whatsoever. A little scary? Well, there's a bunch of fail-safe built into it. If one of these sensors on this rack and pinion, the steering system, or the throttle, they don't agree or they don't talk to each other, you're not going to go very far. It's going to shut the car down. Well, we should have the basics down pretty good. We need to get over to the fun stuff and start taking that rack and pinion out, and we'll do that as soon as we return with more Tech Garage.
What component inside a rack and pinion directs fluid to the appropriate places? A. Spool valve, B. Rack, C. Pinion, or D. Tie rod? The correct answer is A. The spool valve directs fluid to either side of the rack assembly to aid in driver assist.